Welcome to Shuffle Source. I'm your host Brandon, and today we are back with another Duskmourn House of Horror Precon upgrade video, this time featuring Aminatou, Veil Piercer from Miracle Worker. Let's get into it. Really quick, before getting into the commander and the game plan for the deck, let's quickly go over the Precon upgrade format that we follow here at Shuffle Source. The first thing to consider here is that we can use either the primary or backup commander when constructing this Precon upgrade. In this video, we will be using Aminatou, the primary commander here. Next is that we try to keep the budget between $50 to $100 when we're considering what additions we're going to be adding to the deck. And next, we try to add 10 cards and remove 10 cards. Now, we will actually be doing 12 and 12 in this case, but we try to stay around 10. And then next, we also offer a few no budget options at the end of the video. These are cards that are either just a little bit more expensive, that may take it a little bit over budget, or just give you options of how you really want to amplify the deck going forward. So let's go over the commander of this deck. We have Aminatou, Veil Piercer for 1 colorless, a white, a blue, and a black. You have a 2/4 legendary creature, Human Wizard, that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 2. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, then put any number of them into your graveyard, and the rest on top of your library in any order. Each enchantment card in your hand has Miracle. Its Miracle cost is equal to its mana cost reduced by 4 colorless. You may cast a card for its Miracle cost when you draw it if it is the first card you drew this turn. So what we are trying to do with this deck is manipulate the top of our library so that we can set up some big explosive enchantment plays that we can play for the Miracle cost that our commander provides for us. Aminatou comes with everything we really need to enable that gameplay strategy. The ability to surveil the top of our deck before we draw, and the ability to give all of our enchantments Miracle to be played at a reduced cost is exactly what we're trying to do, and she enables that plan just on her own. The deck is actually pretty well constructed out of the box. The upgrades that we have for this deck just really continue to emphasize the game plan further. So we're going to add more ways to manipulate the top of our library, more ways to enhance the enchantments we already have, and of course adding some more powerful enchantments to capitalize on the Miracle cost reduction that Aminatou provides for us. Another fun thing to consider is that this commander will actually allow us to play enchantments on our opponent's turn this way. Normally you can't play enchantments on your opponent's turn unless they had something like Flash, because Miracle says the first card you draw on a given turn. So if you're in your opponent's turn and you use one of the many ways there are to draw a card on your opponent's turn, you can actually play a big flashy enchantment for its Miracle value that she provides. The first of the additions we have today is Doom Whisperer for 3 colorless and 2 black. It is a 6/6 creature nightmare demon that has flying and trample and pay 2 life, surveil 2. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, then put any number of them into your graveyard and the rest on top of your library in any order. Now granted, it is not an enchantment creature, but it is a 6/6 flying trample body that has a really great ability, and that's why we're going to add it. The ability to pay 2 life and surveil 2 is major. Not only is it another way to try to set up your perfect Miracle outside of your turn, because obviously our commander can do that on our turn and at the start of the turn, but let's say we need to try to set up a Miracle for a really big play on our opponent's turn, we can do this as many times as we need to get the perfect card on top. Also, let's say we get it to be our turn and we try to do the surveil that Aminatou provides, and the 2 cards that we get are not what we need to set up for a big turn. We can keep digging. We use Aminatou first. If it works, great. If not, then we just pay 2 life, we surveil 2 again, surveil 2 again, surveil 2 again. We don't have to tap this creature in order to continue to do this. Yes, you're going to be paying a lot of life potentially, but if it is a game-winning move, or it's something that's really going to enhance your gameplay by getting the perfect Miracle off, this is the perfect card for this deck to do that. You can pick this card up for 57 cents at time of recording. Next up, coming in at 93 cents, we have Debtor's Knell for 4 colorless and a white-black, white-black, white-black. You have an enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now this is a great card. Again, it's an enchantment. It has the ability for us to maximize the reduction that Aminatou provides, which is 4 colorless. We could get this in for potentially 3 mana. I also like that the pip option to pay is multicolor, so that we don't have to try to always pay with 3 black or 3 white mana. In a 3 color deck, this gives us more reliability to get this enchantment to actually hit the board. This is a really great card to add because there's a lot of ways for us to get creatures into the graveyard. Maybe sometimes we want to surveil the creatures into the graveyard, or we have targeted removal, or maybe someone does a board wipe. Your opponents could be putting creatures into the graveyard. At the beginning of our upkeep, we're going to choose the best creature in any graveyard, and we're going to put it into the battlefield under our control. This is a really good card for us to add. It's going to add some really good board presence and could be a way to lead us to victory. Next up, for 93 cents, we have Entity Tracker. For 2 colorless and 1 blue, you have a 2/3 creature human scout that has Flash and Eerie. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, draw a card. As you know, card draw wins games. So we're adding Entity Tracker because we need to add a little bit more card draw to this deck to really make sure we keep things moving with this deck as we go through our turns. And the fact that we're playing enchantment payoffs here means that there's going to be a lot of opportunities to trigger Entity Tracker for us to continue to draw cards. We also do have rooms in this deck, so anytime we also unlock a room, that is another opportunity to draw a card. Next up, for 18 cents, we will be adding another board wipe to this deck. We have Extinguish All Hope for 4 colorless and 2 black. It is a sorcery that reads, destroy all non-enchantment creatures. So the reason we want to add this to the deck is because a lot of times this can be a close to, if not a one-sided board wipe in our favor, right? It does cost a good amount. There is no way to reduce it, but if we can cast it, we can a lot of times wipe the board and be the only one that has anything of value left on the board, especially in regards to our enchantment creatures that we have. You also want to consider that we have Secret Arcade in this deck, so there are going to be some times in some games where we have this card out and it makes all of our non-land permanents enchantments. So in that case, even the creatures that are not enchantments by themselves become enchantments, and then it really is a one-sided board wipe in the sense of nothing on our board is going to be touched when we cast this. This is a really great card to just clear out the board and allow us to swing in with a lot of those enchantment creatures that we will have left. Next up, for $2, we have Ghostly Prison. For 2 and 1 white, you have an enchantment that reads, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 colorless for each creature they control that's attacking you. The reason we're adding this card is quite simple. In the early game, this is a great way to sort of protect us while we continue to build up a very strong presence of high-powered enchantments. A lot of times in a game of Commander, your opponents are going to want to swing at other people simply because they don't want to pay the 2 to swing at you. And it won't be until much later in the game that they'll have the mana or have creatures valuable enough to pay the mana for them to want to swing at you. And by that point, you'll have such a strong board that you're going to be able to overwhelm and win the game. So for $2, this is a really good include. It's another enchantment that can trigger a lot of those things such as Entity Tracker or any other card that gives you an enchantment payoff. Next up, we have Lightning Greaves for $3. It is 2 colorless. It is an artifact equipment that says equipped creature has haste and shroud and an equipped cost of 0. Why we're adding this is very simple. For one, it adds much needed protection for our commander because once our opponents realize the value that Aminatou provides for us, she's going to become a target very quickly. So having Lightning Greaves is a great way to protect her. Next, the ability to give things haste is massive. There are definitely some powerful creatures in this deck that not only have an ETB, but also definitely want to swing the turn they come in on. So between the protection and the haste, it is definitely something we want to add to this deck. Next up, we have Lauren of the Third Path. For 2 colorless and 1 white, we have a 2/1 legendary creature human artificer that says Vigilance. When Lauren of the Third Path enters, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. You can also tap her for you and target opponent each draw a card. You can pick this up at $2.18 at the time of recording. Lauren actually adds a lot of value. Lauren is going to allow us to get rid of a pesky artifact or enchantment our opponents have, and Lauren will also give us much needed card draw in this deck. Now, obviously, an opponent will also get to be able to draw a card, but you get to choose which opponent that is, so you can analyze the board state to really determine who would be the person that would benefit the least from drawing a card, while you also do get to draw a card. And you can do this every turn. So this is a repeated way to get card draw in this deck. It's just a really great include and provides a lot of value for us. Our next edition at $6.19 will be Overlord of the Mistmoors for 5 colorless and 2 white. It is a 6/6 enchantment creature avatar whore with impending 4 for 2 colorless and 2 white. If you cast this spell for its impending cost, it enters with 4 time counters on it and isn't a creature until the last is removed. At the beginning of your end step, remove a time counter from it. And then it says, whenever Overlord of the Mistmourn enters or attacks, create 2/2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. Now, I know at face value 7 mana is a lot to ask for this creature, but please keep in mind it is an enchantment creature. So we're definitely trying to maximize the cost reduction that comes off of Aminatou's Miracle Reduction. If we can get this card in for 3 mana, that is a great rate for a 6/6 that creates 2 evasive bodies when it enters. Additionally, we talked about adding Lightning Greaves. So if you can get this in for 3 mana, create the 2 flying insects, throw on the Lightning Greaves, swing in the same turn with 2 more flying insects, you just got 5 creatures for the rate of 3 mana. This is a really great creature. Again, it's an enchantment, so it works towards all of our enchantment payoffs. This is a great include. Next up, coming in at $5.49, we have Penance. For 2 colorless and 1 white, it is an enchantment that says choose a card from your hand and put that card on top of your library. Prevent all damage from a black or red source. This is an amazing card for this deck. There are going to be times where you're drawing amazing enchantments into your hand that you wish you could be miracling. This allows you to do that later. You can do this before you draw on your turn. You can do this before you draw on your opponent's turn. This gives so much value to you to set up the perfect miracle for any situation you need. The ability to prevent damage from a red or black source is also a very nice to have. It's not the primary reason we want the card in here, but it is a great just additional bonus for us to have to protect ourselves from red and black sources. One important thing to know, while it's really not a big deal, is that if you do have Aminatou on the board, which is a black source, and you do activate this ability, you will need to choose Aminatou to prevent the damage from a source. However, that's a small price to pay for the fact that you're going to get to stack the deck with whatever powerful enchantment you want. Next up, we have Starfield of Nyx for 4 colorless and 1 white. It is an enchantment that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield, as long as you control 5 or more enchantments. Each other non-aura enchantment you control is a creature in addition to its other types, and has a base power and base toughness each equal to its mana value. This card a lot of times will be what will end the game for you. Not only does it allow you to recur powerful enchantments to the board, even essentially cheat some things in if you really needed to. For example, that Overlord of the Mistmourns we talked about adding, if that for some reason was in the graveyard, you can cheat this in and pay 0 mana to get that great creature onto the battlefield. But that's just part of what this does. The recursion alone makes this card amazing, but it's that second ability is what is going to turn this into a game ender and potentially win you the game. If you have 5 or more enchantments, all of your non-aura enchantments now become creatures, and their base power and toughness is equal to the mana value. There are very expensive high CMC enchantments in this deck. You are going to have very big creatures on this board with this on the battlefield. Not only, this card itself will turn into a 5/5 to just really help your board state. This is probably one of the best cards you can add to a deck like this. And for $6.95, this is an easy buy, easy include, easy upgrade for this deck. Here we have Teferi, Master of Time, for 2 colorless, 2 blue, with a starting loyalty of 3. He is a legendary planeswalker that says you may activate loyalty abilities of Teferi, Master of Time on any player's turn anytime you could cast an instant. For 1 loyalty up, you can draw a card, then discard a card. For -3 loyalty, you can target creature you don't control and phase it out. And then for -10, you can take 2 extra turns after this one. So for $5.88, we really do like Teferi in this deck. Unlike most planeswalkers, Teferi gets to activate on anyone's turn anytime you could do an instant. You can use his loyalty abilities. That's amazing. All of Teferi's loyalty abilities are really good for this deck. This is another way to get card draw. We also don't mind necessarily discarding any cards into the graveyard because there's several ways for us to either recur or maybe we want to put something in the graveyard. Let's say we have Starfield of Nyx out. We have an enchantment in our hand that we really want to get to the graveyard. The next time it becomes our upkeep, we can then get that into play for free. Not only that, let's say there's a very powerful creature your opponent has. This is a great way to get yourself out of trouble. They're going to swing for lethal on you. You're just going to say, no, thank you. That's phased out. And that could potentially buy yourself to your next turn for you to try to win the game. And then if for some reason Teferi goes unanswered, You can then spend the 10 loyalty to take 2 extra turns. You can do so much with 2 extra turns with this deck. You're probably winning the game at that point. Teferi's loyalty can go up very quickly. If you still have all opponents on the board, you can be doing the +1 each time it's your opponent's turn. All of everything I mentioned was great, but let's talk about what makes Teferi really awesome in this deck. Remember the ability of Miracle. The first time you would draw a card each turn, you may play a card for its Miracle cost. Teferi is going to allow you to draw a card on every opponent's turn. You could be potentially casting a card for its Miracle cost every turn this way. Teferi is just a machine in this deck. Every single thing he offers you is beneficial to your deck and beneficial to your win condition. And here we have the last of the additions. We have Zur, Eternal Schemer. For 1 white, 1 blue, 1 black. We have a 1/4 legendary creature human wizard that has flying. Enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. And for 1 and 1 white, target non-aura enchantment you control becomes a creature in addition to its other types and has a base power and toughness equal to its mana value. For $10, Zur fits really nicely in this deck. First of all, we already do have quite a bit of great enchantment creatures, and we're now going to be able to give them Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. That's major. But also we have really big enchantments that we would love to turn into very big creatures to help us swing out. Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof is terrifying for your opponents. Not only does it make everything they put up against to block your enchantments die, but also the fact that you're going to just get massive life off of all of the lifelink. And if your opponent has targeted removal, guess what? Your enchantment creatures have hexproof. They're not going to be able to get them. Or let's say your opponent decides they want to destroy target enchantment and your enchantment is not a creature yet. You can pay the 2, turn it into an enchantment creature with Zur, and now it is hexproof. Super valuable card. This card is a force multiplier for the deck and will absolutely help you win the game. All right, so we've added 12 cards, which means we now need to remove 12 cards. And with the first of the removals, we have Aminatou's Augury. For 6 colorless and 2 blue, it is a sorcery that reads, exile the top 8 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield. Until end of turn, for each non-land card type, you may cast a spell of that type from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. The first thing is, holy 8 mana. That is such a huge cost for this card. For 8 mana, there's just way too much variability for this to be super impactful. I really think the reason that this card is in the deck is because it's kind of a on flavor brand with the fact that our commander is Aminatou. So adding Aminatou's Augury just kind of made sense to include in this deck. I really do think that for that 8 mana, we could do a lot of more impactful, smaller spells that could help us advance our game a bit better. So for that, we're going to cut this card. Next on the chopping block, we have Arvanax the Mind Flail. For 4 colorless and 3 black, it is a 9/9 legendary enchantment creature horror that says, Arvanax the Mind Flail isn't a creature unless you control 3 or more permanents you don't own. At the beginning of your end step, exile the bottom card of each opponent's library face down. For as long as those cards remain exiled, you may look at them. You may cast permanent spells from among them, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So the first thing you'll notice is that it is an enchantment creature, and it does synergize well with the 4 cost reduction with what Aminatou provides. However, the first red flag with this card is 3 black pips is kind of a massive ask for a 3-color deck. There are going to be a lot of times that you could have this card or even attempt to miracle this card, and you just don't have the mana that you need, the 3 black pips, to get this card into play. Not to mention, we really don't care about manipulating or looking at the cards of our opponent's library with this deck. We care about what's on top of our library. Based on those reasons, this is a pretty easy removal in my opinion. I just don't think that Arvanax is going to provide the value a lot of times that you wish it would. Next up, we have Auramancer for 2 colorless and 1 white. It is a 2/2 creature human wizard that says when Auramancer enters, you may return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. Now for me, this was basically a straight swap with Entity Tracker. It is the same CMC, and it is also a creature. Now, Being able to recur an enchantment from the graveyard to your hand is good. However, we already have several ways to do that. And what we didn't have is a lot of ways to get card draw. So honestly, Entity Tracker was a straight swap for me. Like, it's just 1-for-1. It was one of the easiest swaps I did. We really don't need Auramancer in this deck. I would rather have more card draw. So we're going to be removing this card. Our next removal is Burnished Heart for 3 colorless. It is a 2/2 artifact creature elk. For 3 colorless, you can sacrifice Burnished Heart, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Burnished Heart really just feels like a relic from the past. I don't feel that Burnished Heart really keeps up with the current state of the Commander game that exists today and the cards that are coming out. Honestly, it costs 3 mana to come down, and then you have to invest another 3 mana, sacrifice the creature to then get the 2 pieces of ramp. It's just too expensive for any value it gives you, and you'll find that when you actually play Burnished Heart a lot of times, it just didn't feel worth it. And for that reason, we're going to cut the card. Next on the chopping block, we have Dream Eater. For 4 colorless and 2 blue, we have a 4/3 creature Nightmare Sphinx that has flash, flying, and when Dream Eater enters, surveil 4. When you do, you may return target non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. Now, don't get me wrong, Dream Eater is not a bad card. It does a lot of neat things for us. The fact that it's a flying 4/3 body, the fact that you can flash it in, and the fact that you can surveil 4 and bounce something to your opponent's hand are all very nice. However, one of the things that kind of goes against it is it's not an enchantment creature. So you'll be paying 6 if you really do want this creature to come out. And honestly, while the bounce is nice, there's just a lot of other things I feel we could do with 6 mana that's actually going to help our board state more. So for that, we're going to cut Dream Eater. Our next removal is Monologue Tax. For 2 colorless, 1 white, it is an enchantment that reads, whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you create a treasure token. Now, most people that read this, face value, think that this is actually a really good card. However, in my experience playing the card, seeing my friends play this card, it just never ends up providing the value that you think it does when you read the card. Most people would call this Smothering Tithe at Home, but honestly, it's just not even close to being any form of Smothering Tithe at Home. And what you'll probably find is that for the same amount of mana, you could put in, for example, Ghostly Prison or Propaganda, and you'll just get more value out of the enchantment right away. Yes, it's not ramping you, but at least you'll definitely see the benefits from it. What you'll find is that Monologue Tax in a lot of cases just won't trigger as much as you think it will. If you really, really want a card like this, I would try to either save up to get a Smothering Tithe or just find another piece of ramp for your deck instead. I think that you'll find in playtesting that this card just does not deliver the way you think it would based on your first impressions of it. Our next removal is Otherworldly Gaze for 1 blue. It is an instant that says Surveil 3 and has a flashback of 1 and 1 blue. So the reason we want to remove this card is because while Surveil is good, we do have a lot of ways that we already had in the deck to manipulate what's on top of our library. We're also adding cards to manipulate the top of our library. But the big downfall for this card is nowhere on this card does it actually say to draw the card. If it actually had mentioned draw card on here, then I actually think it might be worth keeping. But honestly, the way the card reads now, I just don't think it's worth the spot that it occupies, and we could be putting something way better in here that will actually give us the card draw that we need in this deck. Next, we have Phenomenon Investigators for 2 and a blue and a black. It is a 3/4 creature human detective that says, as Phenomenon Investigators enters, choose Believe or Doubt. Believe. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black horror enchantment creature token. Or Doubt. At the beginning of your end step, you may return a non-land permanent you own to your hand. If you do, draw a card. For 4 mana, only getting to benefit from one of the abilities listed just doesn't seem like it's really worth it to me. I would maybe consider keeping it if you were to get the abilities of both Believe and Doubt, because then in that case, there's just a lot more value given for what you're paying. But like honestly, on Doubt, right, we're not really caring about bouncing a lot of our stuff back to our hand. We're not the biggest on ETB abilities here for this to really make a lot of sense. We're adding other repeatable card draw that doesn't involve you bouncing things back to your hand. So it's just doesn't seem to be quite worth it. And honestly, when I was looking for cards to cut, this was one of the things that kind of jumped out at me first. So I don't think you're going to miss having this. And I think this is a card you'll remove and not regret it. Next up, we have Prognostic Sphinx for 3 and 2 blue. It is a 3/5 creature Sphinx that has flying. Discard a card. Prognostic Sphinx gains hexproof until end of turn, tap it. Whenever Prognostic Sphinx attacks, scry 3. Now I know not every creature in this deck is an enchantment creature, but we prefer to have that be the case if we can. One of the things against Prognostic Sphinx is that it's not an enchantment creature, so that's already kind of a ding against it. If it was an enchantment creature, I might consider it a little bit more. I don't really like the fact that we need to discard a card to give it hexproof and then tap it. I honestly think our opponents are going to probably use removal on a lot of the scarier things we have in our deck first before that ability would even become relevant at all for us. And also, while Scry 3 is not nothing, honestly, Surveil actually lends better to what we're trying to do in this deck anyway. If we can get a Redress Fate off, we're just going to put all of our enchantments onto the battlefield. So we don't necessarily hate when things go to the graveyard. So Surveil for us in this case is going to always be better than Scry 3. I just think if you were to really look at everything in the deck and stack Prognostic Sphinx up against it, you'll just see that this card just seems like something that should be cut and it won't really be a problem. Here we have Return to Dust for 2 colorless and 2 white. It is an instant. Exile target artifact or enchantment. If you cast this spell during your main phase, you may exile up to 1 other target artifact or enchantment. Similar to Burnished Heart, this card also kind of feels like a relic of an older commander style that existed years ago. There's just a lot better removal that exists nowadays. 4 mana is a lot for a artifact and enchantment removal. The deck already does have other ways to do removal, and we also added Lauren, and Lauren on ETB does the same effect, is going to give us card draw and costs 1 mana less. So honestly, Return to Dust is going to get the axe here. Up next, we have Time Wipe. For 2 colorless, 2 white, and 1 blue, it is a sorcery that says return a creature you control to its owner's hand, then destroy all creatures. Honestly, as far as board wipes go, I really don't like this one. Let's just compare it to some other board wipes that exist. I mean, even Supreme Verdict is 1 less mana. It can't be countered. Yes, it destroys all creatures, but honestly, I don't know that you're going to miss the one that you get to save. It's not like it gets to stay on the board. You have to return it back to your hand. And not only that, we did add Extinguish All Hope, which yes, is 1 more mana. It is different colors, but it's closer to a one-sided board wipe, and in some instances can be a one-sided board wipe for us. So honestly, for me, just swapping out Time Wipe for Extinguish All Hope just felt way better as far as the quality of board wipes we want to include in this deck. And for the last of the removals, we have Thirst for Meaning. For 2 colorless and 1 blue, it is an instant that reads, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an enchantment card. Now at face value, you might think that this is actually a really good card, but keep in mind, you are drawing 3, and no matter the outcome, you are at least discarding 1, and in some instances, you're discarding 2, because there are going to be times when you play this that you're going to whiff, and you're not going to get an enchantment card, and you're going to have to discard 2 other cards. So you spent 3 mana to really get 1 card? Just doesn't seem like a good rate. There's going to be other times when you do draw an enchantment, and you do not want to discard that enchantment. Maybe you want to play it that same turn, and you don't want to have to try to recur it from your graveyard. There's just too much whiff potential here. We did add other pieces of card draw in this deck, including repeated card draw, so I think that we can comfortably cut this card and you won't miss having it. And here we are with the no budget options that we're going to include for this Precon upgrade. We're going to start off with, for $12, Enlightened Tutor. For 1 white mana, it is an instant that says search your library for an artifact or enchantment card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. Now, when I typically create these Precon upgrades, I try to not include tutors really in either of the main editions or the no budget upgrades. However, for this particular deck where the theme really is trying to do miracle with enchantments off the top of your library, it just feels fitting for there to be an Enlightened Tutor in this deck if you wanted to take this deck up a notch. I think even in a more casual pod or a casual crowd of folks that you're playing with, it would be more acceptable to see an Enlightened Tutor, considering it is very focused in what it can search for compared to like a Vampiric Tutor. Obviously, if you're playing with a more competitive crowd, I would say you could go ahead and do the Vampiric Tutor, but honestly, Enlightened Tutor is really satisfying what we're trying to do here, and that's the name of the game. We're going to search for the best enchantment that we want to. We're going to put it on top of our library, and we're going to miracle that card in as the first draw of our turn. For the next of the no budget options, we have Jace the Mind Sculptor for 2 colorless and 2 blue with a starting loyalty of 3, Legendary Planeswalker. For 2 loyalty up, you can look at the top card of target player's library. You may put that card on the bottom of that player's library. For 0 loyalty, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. For -1, return target creature to its owner's hand. And for -12, exile all cards from target player's library, then that player shuffles his or her hand into his or her library. For $12.30, I think Jace is a very interesting include and upgrade for this deck. Jace offers a lot of modes that are actually interesting and useful to this deck. The primary one, of course, being the Brainstorm one for 0. That's the one we will probably be using the most. That's going to allow us to draw 3 cards, reorganize the order of the cards on top of the deck, structure that to where we can set up some very good miracle casts on either our opponent's turn or our following turn. However, some of his other modes are also useful. Being able to look at your own library and essentially scry it and put it to the bottom, or if your opponent uses a tutor or anything where they're structuring the top of their deck, you can mess up their plans that way. If there is a very impeding or dangerous creature on the board, you can absolutely bounce that back to their owner's hand. And then, of course, if for some reason your opponents let Jace get that high on the loyalty, you probably won't, because again, you're probably using the 0 as much as you can. You can definitely use this as a pseudo win con against an opponent if you want to just get rid of their library and have their hand become their new library. So interesting modes. Of course, the Brainstorm on the stick is really what we're interested in taking him for, but super great to include for this deck. You won't regret picking it up. And you probably could have guessed, for the last of the no budget options, we have Sensei's Divining Top for 1 colorless. It is an artifact that says pay 1. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put them back in any order. Or you can tap Sensei's Divining Top to draw a card, then put Sensei's Divining Top on top of its owner's library. Sensei's Divining Top is a very good card in any deck where you're really trying to manipulate the top of your library at any time. This deck is absolutely one of those decks. So Sensei's Divining Top is a way for you to repeatedly structure the cards at the top of your library for you to pull off the best miracles that you can at any time. Additionally, it has amazing staying power, because at any time if someone decides to try to destroy or target your artifact, you can simply tap the top, draw a card, and then put the top on top of your library, now making it essentially unable to be targeted. So it has great staying power, and it's going to just continue to reliably help you throughout the game. Most of the times, people are not able to get rid of the top, even if they try to. So you're just going to be structuring the top of your library continually, which is why for $15.27, this is an amazing include to include in this deck, and it will be a powerhouse in here. And there we have it. After upgrading 12 cards in this deck, we have a total upgrade cost of $44.03. Of course, this total does not include the no budget options. This is only the 12 additions that we added. I want to thank you for watching this video with me today, and please consider liking and subscribing, as it really helps out the channel. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the additions and the removals. Would you have done anything different? Also, if you get the chance to try some of these upgrades, I'd love to hear how they worked out for you. Thank you again. Until next time.